welcome back to the EdgeVerse TechCast, your go-to place for everything related to NXP software, tools, and developer enablement. I'm your co-host, Bridget Stone, and today we're shining the spotlight on a tool that quietly solves one of the biggest frustrations in embedded development: setting up your environment correctly the first time. Because let's be honest, installing tool chains, SDKs, dependencies, and making sure everything works together, that's not exactly the fun part of the job. But there's a better way, and that's what today's episode is all about: the MCUXpresso installer.
And I'm Kyle Dando. Bridget, I've said this before, but I think the name installer, it really undersells what this tool actually does. If it were up to me, I'd call it the MCUXpresso Dream Maker.
Dream Maker? That's a bold brand name idea.
Well, the more I think about it, most developers have nightmares, like you mentioned, about installing their tools. Version conflicts, they're missing the dependencies, those broken paths. It's like a horror movie marathon, but without the popcorn. The MCUXpresso installer takes all that complexity and makes the process predictable, repeatable, and painless.
And joining us today is someone who helps make all that possible: Alexandra Muricini, software engineer on the MCUXpresso installer team. Alexandra, welcome to the EdgeVerse TechCast. We're so happy to have you.
Hey everyone, as you mentioned, my name is Alexandra Muricini and I am on the team of software engineers developing the MCUXpresso installer. I am based in Bucharest, Romania, and before this role I worked on the MCUXpresso IDE. Back then, a big part of my job was making sure all the different components were integrated successfully into the final build, but everything was done in a monolithic way. Now, on the MCUXpresso installer team, I am taking that experience and applying it to a more modular approach.
Well, we always like to start with a fun icebreaker. Alexandra, imagine you're at a family reunion and your grandmother asks, "What exactly do you do for NXP?" How do you explain the MCUXpresso installer in a way that anybody can understand?
Well, if my grandmother asked me what I actually do at NXP, I would explain it using something familiar: assembling furniture. I would tell her that setting up a development environment for microcontrollers, it's usually like buying one of those big boxes full of wooden pieces, screws, and a long, confusing instruction sheet.
That's such a perfect analogy because everyone has lived through that exact frustration. And unlike furniture, you can't just tighten a screw and fix your tool chain.
Yes, just like in Kyle's analogy. That being the case, developers normally have to sort everything out, figure out which piece goes where, and hope they don't accidentally put a part in backwards. It's slow, frustrating, and easy to get wrong. What I work on is the tool that delivers the furniture already assembled. Everything is in the right place, perfectly aligned, and ready to use. So, instead of spending hours building the setup, developers can sit down and start working immediately. My job is basically to spare them the headache of the assembly process.
That's so good, Alexandra. I'm sure your grandparents are super proud of their all-star granddaughter. So now let's jump into more information about the installer for our listeners. What are the problems that the MCUXpresso installer is solving, and why would our customers want to have such a tool?
So, if we look beyond the furniture analogy, here is what really happens in the technical world. When a developer wants to work with a microcontroller, they don't just download one tool, they need an entire stack: compilers, SDKs, drivers, debuggers, build utilities, configuration tools, and each of these lives in a different place. You might find one tool on a vendor's website, another buried in a GitHub release, another behind a login page, and the instructions often stretch across long documentation pages. Even once everything is installed, compatibility becomes a gamble. One version only works with certain operating system, another requires a specific SDK revision, and just one mismatch can break the whole workflow. And since developers rarely stick to a single project, they often juggle multiple versions of the same tool, hoping that installing a new one doesn't overwrite something in another project depends on. And to that, the fast-moving ecosystem. New tools versions can be released at any time, and they end up repeating this cycle far more often than they would like. And when something fails, it is usually not their code. It's a missing driver, a broken path, or a tool that silently didn't install correctly. Team lose time fixing the environment instead of building the product. This is the real complexity of tool dependencies, and it's exactly the kind of nightmare the MCUXpresso installer is designed to take off their shoulders.
Perfect. We don't want any nightmares. So you just mentioned teams in your description. A huge challenge that I see is when a company is trying to make sure their entire team has the same and proper setup. It just compounds the problems that you just mentioned.
Yes, and everyone knows the frustration of their computer not working. I know that's a basic problem. And after hearing this explanation, I really understand the value of the MCUXpresso installer. So, Alexandra, can you detail the benefits the installer provides in solving these tool dependencies?
The MCUXpresso installer brings real, tangible benefits because it tackles tool dependencies challenges from every angle. First, instead of forcing developers to search across multiple websites or documentation pages, we have already done that. We identified all the relevant sources and made sure the installer knows exactly where to retrieve each component from. Second, it handles version management automatically. We support multiple types of repositories, MCUXpresso SDK, Zephyr, and Matter. Many of our components are shared across these three categories. Each category may require different versions, and the installers make this easy by allowing multiple versions to coexist on the same machine without conflicts. Every project gets precisely the version it needs, while older configurations remain untouched.
That version management alone is huge, especially when you're supporting multiple projects at once. And the offline install support is critical for enterprise environments.
Yes, and we ensure full support across Windows, macOS, and Linux. Developers get a consistent setup experience regardless of the operating system they prefer, and the installer prepares the correct binaries and dependencies for each platform.
That describes a dream scenario in my mind, but what are other benefits that people might not be aware of?
Well, another major benefit is automatic environment configuration. The installer handles pet updates and dependency ordering behind the scenes, eliminating one of the most common sources of setup failures. We also support offline images, which is a major advantage for team working behind strict corporate firewalls or on a machine without a stable internet connection. You can download all required tools and packages on a machine with full access, move them to the restricted environment, and the installer will install everything locally without needing internet access. And finally, because the installer manages everything centrally, we dramatically reduce issues like missing drivers, broken paths, overwritten components, or silently failed installations. In short, the installer brings order, consistency, and reliability to a process that used to be scattered and unpredictable. This allows developers to spend their time building products instead of fixing the environment.
That's an absolutely perfect outline of the problems that the installer solves. You've provided a few examples in how the installer actually solves them. Looking at other solutions out there, can you explain some of the alternative solutions to the approach NXP takes?
Well, when you look at embedded development tools today, there's a really strong contrast between the old world and the new one. On the old school side, you've got those monolithic IDEs built on the Eclipse platform, like our MCUXpresso IDE. They pack everything into one big installer: SDKs, compilers, debuggers, examples, even drivers, all glued together. It's convenient at first, but here's the catch: they're heavy, slow to update, tightly locked to the vendor, and the whole environment tends to break if one component changes. You can't mix SDK version easily. Automation is painful, and doing CI/CD often feels like fighting the tool rather than using it. On the modern side, there are a few approaches. I will mention a few. ARM-CMC's tool suite uses Microsoft VCPKG tool. It handles package management, reproducible toolchain, versioning, full scriptability, and total freedom to pick whatever editor you like. However, it is not platform independent and was developed to install libraries, not full executables. This can prevent it from being used for some tools or drivers. The Zephyr project workbench takes modularity even further, with manifest, multi-repo architecture, optional IDE, everything built around automation and scalability. However, this process of tool setup requires the user to navigate the list of sites and tools. TI and ST are still delivering monolithic tool suites. The tools are installed in one deliverable, but the tools and platform can only be used for their workspaces. Silicon Labs Simplicity Installer is very similar to our MCUXpresso installer. We take this as a huge compliment. So the shift is clear. We are moving away from big, rigid IDEs installers towards lightweight, modular, package-driven setup. The monolithic tools define a path, but ecosystem like VCPKG, Zephyr, and installers like our own define where development is going. Flexible, reproducible, and built for real-world workflows.
That's a great explanation of what the installer is solving and the different approaches that you've seen out there with our competition. So now for another question. We are on so many planning calls discussing ways to improve the MCUXpresso development environment. From your perspective on the MCUXpresso installer team, what has been the number one challenge that your team has been tackling? What has been the toughest problem for your team to solve?
The biggest challenge we've been dealing with in the MCUXpresso installer has definitely been isolating ourselves from whatever unpredictable setup the user already has, while still playing nicely with their system. Every machine out there is different. Different libraries, different shells, different policies, different, let's say, surprises. We have to work on all of them without breaking anything. A great example is Python. Almost everyone has some Python version on their system, but the versions vary widely across Linux distributions, macOS releases, and Windows setups. We use a compatible version that's already installed, but we don't rely on its packages. We just use it to spin up a completely isolated virtual environment. Once the virtual environment exists, everything that follows runs inside our own control space within dependencies.
That was a real key requirement we heard from all the customers. Don't mess with my environment. Just make your tools work. But that's easier said than done. It seems like your virtual environment approach has been a very good solution. Now, what about other ways that the installer is respecting the customer's environment?
We have taken the same philosophy with a pet. Yes, we do add our tools to pets so they're discoverable, but we never override system tools. We never delete or modify existing binaries, and everything we add is scoped and reversible. On top of that, we have built mechanisms so if the user installs a new version and something goes wrong, we can cleanly undo just the tools we installed and restore them to the previous working version. We notify the user about what's being uninstalled, and we make sure we only remove our own footprint, nothing else.
So your team is like the cleanup crew. You come in, you do your job, and you leave nothing behind when you leave. That's perfect. All right, can you touch on how corporate environments introduce their own challenges beyond just a person using our tools on their own laptop?
Of course, enterprise environments make all of this even more interesting. You've got machines behind proxies, SSL interception, restricted networks, and company rules that block certain download tools or unzip utilities. We have had to engineer fallback paths for downloads, proxy-aware networking, alternative extraction mechanisms, and more robust verification. So the installer survives those constraints gracefully. At the end of the day, the real challenge hasn't been the installer itself. It's been building an installation process that stays stable, predictable, and fully under our control, no matter what environment it runs in. The goal is simple: deliver a clean, consistent setup every time. Avoid interfering with anything the user already depends on, because it's about reliability, transparency, and giving users an environment they can trust to behave the same way on every machine.
Really, such a great job, Alexandra. I'm so grateful we have incredible engineers like yourself working to solve these challenges. So, final question: how do our listeners evaluate the installer for themselves? Where do they get the installer?
If you're curious about how to try the MCUXpresso installer yourself, it's actually very easy. The simplest starting point is just downloading it directly from nxp.com, where we publish the official releases along with all the platform-specific packages.
We'll make sure to add that link into the episode notes for our listeners.
Perfect. And once you download from that link and it's installed, you don't have to keep checking back manually. The installer has built-in auto-update support. It checks for newer versions when the application is launched. When an update is available, notifies right away so you can stay up to date with the latest fixes and improvements. You can also get the installer automatically through MCUXpresso for VS Code extension. Right in the Quick Start panel, there's a dedicated Open the MCUXpresso installer button that pulls it down for you in one click. And once you turn on the installer integration, the extension can automatically notify when you're missing tools, when something needs to be installed for a particular action, and when a new version is available. All of this works because the extension is actually invoking the MCUXpresso installer's built-in command line support behind the scenes. That is what allows it to detect missing components and request install on demand.
Alexandra, thank you for joining us today and giving us a behind-the-scenes look at the MCUXpresso installer. It's clear it isn't just an installer. It's a foundation that enables developers to work reliably across MCUXpresso, Zephyr, Matter, without those nightmares known as environment setup.
And that's really the key takeaway. The installer removes friction so developers can focus on their quote unquote dream by building, innovating, and bringing products to life. Alexandra, we appreciate you and your team for making this possible.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
And to our listeners, if you haven't explored the MCUXpresso installer yet, now's your time. It's one of the easiest ways to simplify your workflow and ensure your environment is set up correctly from day one. Avoid the hours wasted with the do-it-yourself mentality. Come to rely on the speed of the MCUXpresso installer.
You can find links in the episode description, and as always, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts so you don't miss future episodes.
And until next time, everyone, keep building, keep innovating, get yourself installed today, and we'll see you on the next EdgeVerse TechCast.